This is the most intense Korean film of 2025. For the first time, the man considers using a flower pot to take a life, but fearing it might not be effective, he comes up with what he believes is a more perfect method. He places a funnel into the man's mouth, crushes processed meat and forces it inside, then pours in an entire bottle of alcohol to speed everything along, before removing the funnel and tightly wrapping plastic film around the man's face. Why would he go to such lengths to harm complete strangers? The story begins several months earlier. The man's name is Mansu, a manager at a paper manufacturing plant. One day, a gift of eel delivered by company executives becomes the spark that sets everything in motion. Mansu has a beautiful wife, 2 lovely children, and even 2 dogs he treats as family. He once believed this happiness would last forever, yet after foreign investors took over the factory, large-scale layoffs suddenly began. Because he had previously received premium eel from the executives and held a key position, Mansu believed he would surely be spared. At that moment, all he wanted was to play the role of a good man and help the factory retain more capable employees. So he immediately went to speak with the company president, but the boss had no interest in wasting time on what he saw as meaningless matters. Not long after the boss left, Mansu received devastating news.
장어 선물 받았냐? 아니지.
Only then did he realize that every employee who had been dismissed had received eel in advance. Sure enough, not long after, Mansu himself, who had worked at the paper mill for 25 years, was also let go. After losing his job, he lived each day like an empty shell, and in an effort to ease the pressure of his career collapse, he even joined support meetings for the unemployed.
심호흡하세요. 실직은 사랑하는 내 가족은 내가 새 기회를 찾는 동안 온 마음으로 나를
지지한다. 사랑하는 내 가족은 내가 새 기회를 찾는 동안 온 마음으로 날 지지한다.
He later video called his wife and confessed that he had lost his job. After hearing the news, his wife did not blame him at all, but instead offered him her fullest support and encouragement.
그럼.
새 출발. 나는 가장이다. 나는 거듭난다.
Mansu set a goal for himself to find new work within 3 months. Yet ambition met harsh reality. 13 months passed in the blink of an eye, and he still could not find a proper job. Forced to work as a supermarket laborer, suffering not only mentally, but also from constant pain caused by a severe tooth problem. One day, on a friend's recommendation, he went to interview at a company. The friend had specifically warned him that the boss always asked candidates what their weaknesses were, and advised Mansu to answer that question carefully.
실례가 안 된다면 당신의 단점이 뭔지 말해줄 수 있습니까?
싫은데요? 라고 말하지 못하는 성격. 이게 가장 저의 큰 단점입니다.
It was precisely because of this seemingly harmless remark that he lost the opportunity. After 13 months of barely making ends meet, Mansu's severance pay was almost completely gone. Miri, his wife, immediately decided to cut all unnecessary expenses except for their autistic daughter's cello lessons, and even planned to sell the villa and move into a rented apartment.
집 팔면 대출 갚고 대수동의 아파트 전세는 가능해.
Mansu had no objections to anything else, but he could not agree to selling the house, because the villa carried every memory of his life since birth. Although his parents sold the villa when he was 9, ever since he earned enough to buy it back, he had poured all his effort into it, trying to turn it into the ideal haven he had always dreamed of. But his wife told him that if their family truly went bankrupt, the bank would take the house away anyway.
우리 형편을 이 많은 식구를 먹여 살릴 수는 없다고 생각해.
우리 식구 뭐 하면 되는 거예요?
To further reduce household expenses, Miri had no choice but to ask her parents to temporarily take care of their 2 dogs. From that moment on, dignity meant nothing to he. To protect the job that sustained his entire life, he cornered the factory manager in the restroom, dropped to his knees, and begged him desperately.
쪽팔린 줄 아는 인간이 남 똥 싸고 오줌 싸는데 와서 뭐 하는 짓이오?
The man was named Choi Seon-chul, a direct manager at the paper mill, and this was exactly the position Mansu was most qualified for. While watching the man's television interview, a casual remark from his wife suddenly awakened Mansu.
인간 벼락 같은 거 안 맞나? 비 오는 날 뾰족한 우산 쓰고 가다.
Although she meant it as a joke, Mansu's expression instantly darkened, and a chilling glint flashed through his eyes. He began to believe that if this obstacle were removed, he might be able to take the position himself. From that day on, he started following the target, but before long, he lost him. Mansu hurried down the stairs and found the man talking on the phone in a corner, so he awkwardly scratched his head and tried to slip into a small side door, only to find it locked, leaving him no choice but to pretend to pass by while making a phone call. He then went up to the rooftop and spotted Choi Seon-chul appearing below, immediately raising a flower pot. Yet in the next second, he put it down. Was Mansu having second thoughts? Not at all. He simply wanted something heavier. The moment he lifted the heavy flower pot high above his head, the water that had collected inside suddenly poured out, and the icy stream running down his face brought him back to his senses. Mansu suddenly realized that even if Choi Seon-chul disappeared, he still could not replace him, because there would always be many other competitors.
몇이나 될까, 경쟁자가? 한 10명? 5? 이거 파세요. 얼마 드리면 돼요?
At that moment, a chilling idea crept into his mind like a silent serpent. He deliberately bought a brand new phone to carry out his plan. To avoid suspicion, he placed a recruitment advertisement in a well-known industry magazine under the name of the paper company, fully aware that its influence would attract top candidates. Before long, this convincing setup brought in a large number of applications. After carefully screening them, Mansu selected 2 candidates whose abilities were comparable to his own. His plan was to remove these 2 first, then deal with Choi Seon-chul, leaving the company with no choice but to select him. In preparation, Mansu bought a replica handgun and replaced the real one his father had left behind on the shelf. The first target was Gu Bimo, who knew nothing of the danger approaching and was still at home waiting for an interview notice, while Mansu had already quietly arrived nearby. After several days of observation, Mansu finally found his chance, and when Gu Bimo's wife stepped out, he carefully entered the house. Yet to his shock, the woman suddenly returned, and the sudden increase in music volume instantly alerted her. At that moment, Mansu had already closed in on his target, removed his disguise, and revealed the cold barrel of the gun. But just as he was about to act, the woman appeared behind him and struck him from behind with an object, knocking the gun to the floor. And amid the deafening music, the 3 of them struggled over the weapon as the scene descended into chaos. Terrified, Mansu fled in panic, but the next second, a gunshot rang out behind him, and the person hit was Gu Bimo.
내가 실직을 하고 싶어서 한 게 아니잖아.
내가 몇 번을 말해! 실직 자체가 문제가 아니라 네가 실직에 어떻게 대처하는지 그게 문제라고! 총 2방 맞았다고 죽냐?
Seeing this, Mansu immediately fled for his life, while the woman chased after him relentlessly, pursuing him like a wild beast. That night, Mansu quietly returned and discovered the woman and the young man digging a pit, preparing to bury Gu Bimo. After they went back inside, Mansu slipped into the backyard under heavy rain, dug up the pit, and retrieved the gun. With the first competitor gone, the second one was next. When he finally located his target, Ko Sijo, he discovered that the man was working as a shoe store clerk and had a well-behaved, adorable daughter.
예니야, 왜?
미술학원 끝나고 친구들이랑 좀만 놀다 가도 돼?
미니 아빠가 데려다 주신대?
응.
이것도 아닌 것 같아요.
좋아하실 만한 게 있어요.
Seeing Ko Sijo humbly enduring everything in front of his child just to make a living, Mansu suddenly felt his resolve weaken. Just as Mansu was about to leave, Fate seemed unwilling to let Ko Sijo go so easily.
아, 손님. 다른 분은 가셨네요.
그러게요.
오래 기다리셨죠.
Although Ko Sijo's situation was pitiful, compared with the happiness of his own family, it felt insignificant. Mansu lied and said he wanted to buy shoes for his daughter, but since the child would not be out of school until 8 o'clock, Ko Sijo was willing to wait until closing time just to earn a small commission.
저를 통해서 구입해 주셔야 수당을 받거든요.
예.
Later, Mansu staged a fake car breakdown along Ko Sijo's usual route and waited until after 8. When Ko Sijo finally passed by, Mansu waited there because he had learned from Ko Sijo's resume that he was a mechanical repairman, and after building rapport earlier in the day, he was certain Ko Sijo would offer help. As expected, Ko Sijo began checking the car, and taking advantage of the moment, Mansu put on gloves and quietly moved behind him.
시동 걸어.
After forcing Ko Sijo into the trunk, Mansu removed the vehicle's recorder, and once everything was done, he drove away immediately, unaware that a bullet casing had been left behind on the ground. After returning home, Mansu covered the greenhouse with cloth. Not knowing that his son on the rooftop saw everything, Mansu took out a chainsaw, preparing to deal with the body, and the harsh noise cut through the night. Yet having never done this before, fear crept in, and he eventually abandoned the idea. Instead, he took out a roll of steel wire, wrapped Ko Sijo layer by layer, and tied him up like a tightly rolled bundle. He then dug a deep pit, placed Ko Sijo inside, planted an apple tree above it, and finally poured water into the soil. At that moment, Mansu's toothache flared up again, yet he still chose not to have it removed. The next day, 2 police officers suddenly arrived at his door and asked whether he had interviewed at the paper company, and Mansu replied that he had failed the interview.
고시조라는 이름
처음 들어보는데요.
구본모 씨는요?
잘.
면접 본 분들을 찾아뵙고 있는데요. 뭐 특별한 일 없으셨습니까? 위험을 느꼈다거나?
그 두 분이 사라지셨어요.
어떻게 생각하실지 모르겠지만 두 사람이 죽었다는 얘기보다 저는 그래서 누가 합격을 했을까, 그 사람 얼마나 좋을까 그런 생각이.
사라졌다고 했는데, 그랬는데 유 선생님은 방금 두 사람이 죽었다고 그러셨거든요. 왜 죽었다고 생각하시죠?
요즘 세상에 사라졌으면 대부분 뭐.
The officers then told him they had found Ko Sijo's car by the seaside, along with the phone left inside, and at the same time, the paper company had called to inform Ko Sijo that he had been hired. Originally, they planned to hire someone else, but they could not reach that person, and that man was Gu Bmmo. Through Ko Sijo's call records, the police also discovered that he knew Gu Bmmo, and at the scene, they found Ko Sijo's blood and a bullet casing. Based on these clues, the police suspected a premeditated crime targeting this group of job applicants. After questioning yielded no results, the officers prepared to leave, and before going, they advised Mansu to stay alert and avoid going out alone until the perpetrator was caught.
제가 사라진 대로 바로 연락드리겠습니다.
그런 일로 농담하시는 거 아니에요.
Now, 2 of the 3 competitors had been eliminated, leaving only 1 remaining. And once Choi Seon-chul was gone, Mansu believed he would finally obtain the position he longed for. That night, Mansu sought out Choi Seon-chul under the pretense of admiration and invited him for drinks. And after Mansu's flattery, Choi Seon-chul quickly let down his guard and invited him to his home. As the drinking went on, Choi Seon-chul became increasingly intoxicated. Unaware that Mansu had not taken a single sip and had poured all the alcohol into a basin, when Choi Seon-chul stood up and walked away, Mansu immediately reached for the gun, only to find that Choi Seon-chul was in high spirits and wanted to make another drink together. At that moment, Mansu grew tense again, his legs trembling uncontrollably.
아, 뭐해! 차가워.
Under the numbing effect of alcohol, Mansu took out a pair of pliers and pulled out the tooth that had tormented him for so long. Soon after, the two of them wandered into the yard. Speaking openly from the heart, Mansu began to hesitate, as he did not truly want to harm Choi Seon-chul. But when he thought of the job and how far he had already gone, stopping now would make the other deaths meaningless. Taking advantage of Choi Seon-chul's intoxication, Mansu bound him inside a sack, dug a deep pit, and buried him in the ground, leaving only his head exposed. Meanwhile, Miri noticed her son's recent abnormal behavior and sensed something was wrong, and after pressing him repeatedly, the truth finally came out. Miri then discovered the replica gun and went to the garden, preparing to dig up the apple tree. When she uncovered the body, she did not panic or collapse, but instead calmly called her husband.
미안. 지금 영통은 어렵고.
괜찮아. 당신이나 아파. 야, 닥치고 지금 좀 오면 안 되나?
이런 말하기 싫은데 싫어.
당신이 무슨 안 좋은 일 하면 그건 나도 같이 하는 거야. 알았어?
아유, 걱정 마. 친구가 깬 것 같아. 내일
당신
전화할게.
뺨이.
끊는다. 들어가.
After ending the call, Mansu placed a funnel into Choi Seon-chul's mouth, crushed the processed meat and forced it inside, poured in a bottle of alcohol to speed it along, then removed the funnel and tightly wrapped plastic film around Choi Seon-chul's face. On the other side, their son was trapped in a nightmare, his ears filled with the sound of the chainsaw, and Miri hurried to hold him tightly, telling him that his father had not harmed anyone, and that what was buried underground was only a pig.
돼지 한 마리를 통째로 나무에 먹였더라고. 아빠가 정말 힘들었겠더라.
아, 그랬구나.
At the same time, Mansu dug Choi Seon-chul back up, restored the ground to its original state, then returned indoors and carefully arranged Choi Seon-chul's posture, staging the appearance of a fatal accident caused by drinking, and before leaving, he also took the decayed tooth with him. When he returned home, Miri was already sitting in the living room waiting for him.
1분만.
하나, 둘, 셋, 넷.
Even though Miri had learned her husband's secret, she still chose to keep it hidden, perhaps in her eyes. All of this seemed worth it, because if her husband lost his source of income, the house would be taken by the bank, their daughter's cello lessons would have to stop, and the family could fall apart. She understood her husband's actions, and perhaps this is human nature. When people struggle desperately to survive, everything becomes easier to justify and understand. After removing all the obstacles, Mansu finally obtained the job he had long desired. Miri began living the life of a wealthy wife, and the two dogs were brought back home. However, on this day, the police came knocking once again. After extensive investigation, the police discovered that Ko Sijo and Gu BMMO had represented two major paper companies in a secret bidding process 5 years earlier, which meant the two had already become rivals back then. Gu BMMO's wife also told the police that after the bidding ended, his mental state deteriorated, and after being dismissed, he drank heavily every day, even claiming that he had secretly kept a gun, which also disappeared after he went missing.
이 중에 있을까요?
요거?
아, 구범호 씨 부인이 진짜로 그렇게 말을 했어요?
그러니까 구본모를 조심하십시오.
구범모 씨가 고시조 씨를 죽이고 도망갔다고요?
With Gu BMMO's wife providing crucial testimony, Mansu was completely cleared of suspicion. Today was Mansu's first day at work, and he suggested having roasted pork together over the weekend, but his wife and son strongly resisted, as if they had developed a deep aversion to it.
스트리트! 하우스! 자네 말했어. 안 판다고 집. 사과나무까지 심었잖아. 어떻게 팔아?
After Mansu left, their daughter played the cello alone in the empty house, the melody gentle and sorrowful, This was the only time in the entire film that her talent was fully revealed. Yet her only listeners were the two dogs. The image feels like a cruel metaphor, where the so-called middle-class dream, the so-called artistic refinement, and the so-called beautiful life may ultimately be nothing more than a solo performance meant for dogs. At the very end of the film, Mansu steps into a fully automated factory, where the vast workshop holds not a single worker, only machines operating endlessly. His job is simply to control artificial intelligence through a screen. In other words, after 3 lives were lost, 3 families were destroyed, and his soul was placed on the line, what he gained in the end was merely a job watching machines replace humans. The most frightening part of this film is not what it shows, but what it allows you to see within yourself. When Mansu practices smiling in front of the mirror, when he carefully plans everything for a single position, and when success brings him not joy but emptiness, what we see is not a madman, but an ordinary person pushed to the edge. Even more ironic is that every person Mansu eliminated was another version of himself. The first was a failed husband, the second an incapable father, and the third a technician discarded by the times. By erasing them from reality, he was in fact removing the weaker parts of his own personality, stripping away the flaws that prevented him from winning in competition. A process of inward destruction, a self-inflicted transformation. Using dark humor as a surgical blade, the director precisely cuts open the festering wound of this era, allowing us to see what truly flows out from within. If one day the system abandons us, we may not overturn the table, but instead, like Mansu, we may raise a weapon toward those competing for survival. And that is the true helplessness, and the real horror. See you next time.